Yeah, welcome to this month's Urban Davy. We're excited to have you all. And as usual, we'll know people will trickle in gradually. I see some names coming in. We have some folks that normally join, so thank you for joining. Narayani, Deepa, Sharmila. So today we have Damodar Priya is not well, so we want to wish her well. She's unfortunately progressing more further into more pain from her injuries. So we'd like to pray and wish that she recovers soon. And then today we also have Rukmini Prabhu on the call, and you can see her face there.
I'm in my car, so I'm a little bit crippled here.
Okay. And I'm going to just go over some logistics before we start with our speaker. So today we, excuse me, so we have a schedule. We normally will have the speaker go for about 45 to 50 minutes, then we'll have a 10-minute breakout, and then we'll have about 20 minutes at the end for question and answer. We ask that you leave questions till the end, please, if possible. I would like for all of you to go on mute so we don't disturb the session. And I might mute you all at the beginning. So Jai Gopali, you might have to unmute yourself just to make sure we've got everything covered. Okay. And then at the end, we'll have some announcements, and we'll also post the links for any follow-ups people would like to have or do. And if there's new people, then we'll allow them to help them through as well to get to those links. And then for now, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. Her name is Jai Gopali. She is a yoga practitioner currently, but she has immense. Let me just mute everything quickly. I don't hear some noises. She has a lot of background. She studied at Imperial College in a medical program, and she completed it and recognized early in life for such a young soul that that was not going to help people from the inside. As we know, the medical field has its failings. And so she went on to study the yoga philosophies in all aspects and all senses, and she's still studying the yoga therapy courses, and is now practitioner in that. And then she has been raised in the bhakti tradition, specifically the Vaishnava Gaudiya bhakti tradition. So she brings a lot of the bhakti tradition into this with her rich background in medicine and yoga. So combining that, we have our wonderful speaker today, Jai Gopali. So I'm going to hand over the hosting to her, and she'll start to share slides. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Surabhi Govinda Prabhu. I'm so grateful to be here. And I'm just going to share some of my slides. And if you can see me with the slides, just give me a thumbs up so that I know that perfect, awesome. Thank you so much. So as Surabhi Govinda mentioned, I am Jai Gopali, and today I'm sharing with you some of the lessons that I have learned through being a doctor, and also through actually mainly the lessons I learned from my mum as she transitioned through her journey with cancer and left this world about 4 years ago. And it was a really profound learning time for all of us. So I really wanted to share some of the lessons that I've really gained from this experience, and really I hope that it helps in some way, because for me, this experience changed my life completely. And I'll definitely go into that a little bit more, but I'm definitely so grateful because this is the first time I've ever shared this in a public forum, in a space like this. So I'm so grateful to all of you who've really taken the time out this morning to come and be here to listen to this sharing. And I really, really hope that some part of this really resonates with you. And I honestly, I never thought I'd be sharing this. So thank you. I really, really wanted to thank the team, the Urban Davy team, Rukmini Prabhu and Surabhi Govinda, Damodar Priya Prabhu. They have been so encouraging. So I'm really excited to share this with you. So here we go. We're going to learn 5 lessons from the dying today, as from my own experience. So just a little question just to get us all warmed up. In the chat below, if you could ask someone who has just died a question, what would it be? What would it be? If someone had just passed away, what would that question be? What is on the other side? Ooh, that's a really good question. Why? Wow. What do you want to share with me from your dying experience? What is life about? Did it hurt? Wow. Yeah, amazing. Were you able to remember Krishna? What's life's purpose? Yeah, wow. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you shared these, because these were some of the questions I had in those final days as my mum was leaving her body. And actually, one of the biggest ones was, does it hurt? You know, how is this feeling right now? And there were so many conversations that we had. I was actually really fortunate. My mum, she was very conscious towards the end of her life. So I was able to have so many wonderful conversations that were very painful to have, but just gave me a lot of clarity around death and dying. And at that point in time, the priorities in life were so clear, because this was such a stark contrast of living that my mum was currently experiencing. So thank you so much for that. Those were the kind of questions that I was starting to ask my mum, and some of those I hope to address in this presentation. So just a little bit about me. So my name, obviously for the third time, is Jai Gopali, and I was born and raised in England in a small little village outside of Oxford. And here I am eating one of my favorite British treats, which is jacket potato with some beans on top. And it's so strange, but since moving to America, I've not really found this to be a thing in America. So I really miss this little treat that I would always have in England. And I graduated as a doctor and worked for 2 years as a doctor. And funnily enough, I didn't hate it. There were moments I actually really loved working as a doctor. However, this experience with my mum completely changed my perspective on life. And I really, when my mum passed away, I went back to working as a doctor, and I just couldn't work in the same way and practice in the same way. So I ended up taking a 360 and doing a yoga teacher training course, with the idea of not becoming a yoga teacher, but just to help myself process grief. And in that time, I ended up falling in love with the practices of yoga and wanted to introduce it into some primary and secondary schools in England. So I joined the Avanti schools in England, which have yoga as a studied subject in their schools. And so I got to create a yoga curriculum from scratch, and it was a really meaningful thing to be able to do after making such a career switch. And now I'm going to talk you through what really led to this switch. And a big part of it was this journey with my mum. So this was in May of 2018. This is me and my mum. And I just opened up my final exam results at medical school. And as you can see, she's way more excited for me to be passing and done with medical school than I am myself. I was always really amazed at how present my mum was during that time. And I was 24 years old here. And I didn't know at the time, but my mum was 49 years old. And I honestly thought I had my mum for at least another 20 years. So I wasn't even thinking that I had limited time with her at this point in time. And then in July of 2019, I got married, and actually Rukmini Prabhu was there at the wedding in Radhadesh. And it was, again, a really joyful event. And at this time, again, if you look at my mum in this photo, she just does not look unwell at all. And so I really didn't know at this point that I would only have my mum in this well and healthy state for about 2 weeks, because 2 weeks after the wedding, my mum was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. And it was, from the get-go, it was incurable. And we knew that she was going to die. We didn't know when, we didn't know how, and I didn't know if this was going to be one of those Krishna miracles where my mum would actually bounce back and prove the statistics wrong. So for the time that she had cancer, we all very much lived in hope that she would still make it. But there was this sense, and I remember in August, when we got the diagnosis, it was as though the world had been completely turned upside down. It was just as though the carpet had been pulled from underneath us, because one moment she looked totally fine and we were celebrating the wedding, and then the next moment it was just the complete opposite. We were looking at this final part of my mum's life, and sort of that felt like the beginning of the end at that point. And it was a real contrast of emotions, and I can't quite explain to you in words how bewildering it was. I just wanted to check, can everyone hear me? Okay. I can't quite explain to you in words how bewildering it was, but just the emotions of going from the highest high to the lowest low was such a bewildering feeling at the time. And it's sort of taken me a few years to really be able to process what that journey looked like. But it was that journey that has really shaped the rest of my life. So sorry. So the first lesson I wanted to speak about was this idea of the acceptance of our impermanence. Now, my mum, she, like I mentioned, she was very young in life. So she was 49, she just turned 50 when she was diagnosed. So I really honestly didn't feel like I had to even think about losing a parent at that time. And I don't think my mum had even thought about dying or her death or anything close to kind of ending of her life at that point of her life. I think she very much was starting to feel like me, my brother, my sister were suddenly starting to become adults. My brother was 19, he's the youngest of us. And so she was finally starting to get her life back. So she was kind of thinking that this was the beginning of a new chapter of her life. However, life did have other plans, and there really was this idea of recognizing that we are not invincible. And I know as we get older, this starts to slowly dawn on us. But for my mum, this hadn't really started to dawn on her at all. So this really came as such a shock for her. And I just wanted to touch on this teaching from the Bhagavad Gita. Now, this was the first verse I ever learned from scratch. It was a verse that my mum taught me. I must have been 6 or 7 years old, and she taught me about how the soul is permanent and how it moves through these different bodies, and a sober person isn't bewildered by such a change at the time of death. And we've repeated this verse throughout our lives, and it's a verse that has always kind of stayed with me, mainly because it was the first verse that I learned. But actually, when my mum and I were reflecting on this verse once she'd had cancer, we were realizing just how much we didn't really believe this verse, because we were living as though this verse didn't really resonate and stay true with us. So this is a photo of us actually the day my mum got her diagnosis, and we all went for a walk because it was quite a heavy piece of news, and the 5 of us went for a walk, and we started to discuss at this point, what does this idea of not being here look like to us? And honestly, at this time, none of us could even articulate this feeling of impermanence, because we just didn't see it coming. I think the shock of it was we were definitely still in shock at this point here. So we all know nothing lasts forever. We all know that this material world or things around us, we know that none of this is permanent. Yet actually, when it comes to the reality of knowing that, it's a very different thing, knowing it and living it. Living it as though nothing around us is permanent. And we're so quick to really busy our lives and ignore this fact. But just being able to see ourselves as so impermanent really helped us really understand the preciousness of time in life right now. And obviously at this time, we were being confronted with death, and that was bringing up a lot of emotions. And I will say, really honestly, we all really struggled to accept that this was happening. And actually, of the 16 months that my mum had cancer, we probably spent 13 months of that in complete denial that she had cancer. And it was really interesting when she, and I really have to give the credit to my mum here and also her spiritual teachers, but when my mum started to accept that she was dying, there was this profound shift in the energy that was surrounding my mum. There was a sense of real lightness that came about after she had learned to accept that this was happening. But I have to say the 14 months of not accepting it was a really dark and heavy place. And until my mum learned to accept it, it was almost as though all of us could also accept what was happening. So it had to come from my mum, but it was a really, really difficult lesson in learning how to really be at peace with what was happening. So this idea was really difficult for us. And I have to say, the moment my mum accepted it, I'm so grateful for that now, because I feel like her accepting it allowed a smoother transition for all of us. So for my mum, it really allowed a really nice, smooth transition out. And then for the rest of us, we were able to come to a place of acceptance because of what she did. And I'm so grateful for that even now, because even though I do have ups and downs with the grief of definitely missing my mum at times, there is this element of like real peace knowing that she had a really good death. And I really wanted to share that part of it a little later in this talk, but I'm so grateful that she was able to accept it, because I didn't realize it was the acceptance that really changed it from being a really dark, heavy experience to one of a more lighter and at times a really joyful period. And I'll speak about that a little later. But there was this real profound shift that happened for all of us. And it was around 2 to 3 months before she died. And it was all centered around this word of acceptance. So the lesson here that we learned was this idea of really this acceptance of the impermanence allowed us to really cherish the moments that we had together. So it was like the really simple things. Here we're just sitting on the sofa looking at a few books, but we really just prioritized time together like we hadn't before. And actually it was actually just these little moments. I actually have way more photos of my mum and my family in that last year of her life where she looked really unwell than in the 24 years of my life prior to that. And it was just because we were so much more present to things that were being said, to things that were being shared. And I've not yet still experienced that kind of presence since that time, but we were just totally able to sort of switch out all of the noise and the rubbish that goes on externally and just be totally present. So it was a real lesson in learning how to be present, and that really came from that acceptance piece. So the things that I really took away from this part of my mum being able to accept her own impermanence was being more present with loved ones and taking risks that we'd all been putting off. So all of us, all 5 of us, ended up taking risks that we never would have if my mum didn't go through all of this. And I think for me, I ended up leaving medicine because I had the courage to do so because of this experience. And I feel like this experience really showed me how short life was. I was 25 years old here and my mum was 50. So she was double my age. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, if I continue to live my life like this, as I have for the next 25 years, I'm not going to be looking back at my life feeling like I'm happy with the way it's been. So I think this was such a big learning lesson for me to be able to take those risks. And I also thought to myself, if my mum has gone through all of this and I haven't learned something from that experience, then that feels like such a disservice to what she went through in order to try and teach us some of the life lessons from dying. So I really felt like this experience really helped me take the risks that I needed to. And then I also was able to let go of a lot of things that just weren't weren't feeling good in my life during this time, because it was easier to prioritize myself when you're going through such an urgent crisis like this. And it was just everything became so clear, your priorities become clear and your focus is so much more clear when you're dealing with life and death. So just to enable a breakout discussion later on, I'm just going to ask you you don't even need to write them down, but even just to think about these things as we end this first lesson of acceptance of your impermanence. But I just wanted you to take a moment to think about something in your life, whether it's a relationship or a job or even your own aging process, but something that you're really resisting in your life at the moment. And take a moment to think about, why is it that you're resisting that? There are so many things that we don't like change. We're real creatures of comfort and habit, and this idea of change can be so unsettling. So that can keep us stuck in our process and keep us stagnated. But this idea of being able to use these life experiences to propel us forward in certain ways. And again, grief doesn't mean the loss of a loved one always. It can be change in any form can create grief. Change of a country, change of a job, or change of a relationship. All of that can bring up grief, which can propel us in a different direction. So just wanting you to take a moment, maybe you jot it down, just to think about something that you're resisting change in, and something that you've really wrestled with as you've wanted it to be permanent and stay just as it is. I know from my own experience, there are friendships that I've wanted to stay just as they are because they feel so good at that time. But life always is changing, and I've always really struggled when things have changed, when they've been so lovely. And I just wanted you to just have a think around this, because it comes and ties into our breakout question right at the end. So I'll just give you a little moment just to quickly jot down. Again, they're just ideas. So it's just to give you some bullet points for later on. So just jotting down some ideas here. Okay. Perfect. So we're just jotting down those thoughts, and we're going to move on now to the next lesson that I really learned through this experience, which is the value of time. Now, we all know how precious time can be, so I'm not going to labor so much on that point, but this idea that just taking from our teachings, this verse from the Bhagavad Gita always gets me, of when Krishna says, time I am, he, the divine, the divinity is telling us that he is time. And I love that, because it's like, sometimes we think we can control time. And often I get really frustrated when I run out of time. And then just accepting that actually we don't have any control over that said time is really, for me, really liberating, because I don't tend to get so worked up over just how fragile time can feel. So this teaching of the Bhagavad Gita is something that I'm just going to base this next part of the talk on. But losing my mum made me really, really rethink about how I was spending my time. And the reason I've just decided to share this little photo here is this was a month before her diagnosis. And my mum used to do this thing where she'd call them seize the moment. And we used to find them crazy and really nuts. But this was us on the way home. We were driving back from a little party, and she pulled off the highway in a random location to watch the sunset. And it was just so random. And I was like, Mom, what are we doing? Like, we need to get home. I really got loads of things to do. At the time, I had an evening shift at the hospital. So I was really wanting to get back. And now looking back at it, I'm just so glad she pulled us off the highway. And we had we watched the sunset for all of probably 10 minutes, but it was so beautiful. And it's something that's really stuck in my mind, of this idea of really cherishing those little moments. And as my mum would call them, seize the moment, and just go and do something that feels, just really wonderful to be in that moment. So the value of time, we often think we have plenty of time, and we it's so funny, when my mum was diagnosed, the concept of time totally changed. I, for one, stopped working so that I could look after my mum full time. And I remember the days feeling really long, because watching someone you love suffer and go through chemotherapy, if anyone has been through chemotherapy here or has watched someone you love go through chemotherapy, there are so many things that can do to your body that can feel so torturous. So the days felt really long, but then overall time felt like it was slipping away. And I've never felt anxiety like it, this idea of how long have we got left. And I remember feeling so on edge at all times, because I just didn't know how long we had left. So this concept of time really shifted for me, because I realized that we live as though we have unlimited time always. We have money, fame, material possessions, and all those things can come and go. But when we spend time, we will never get that back. Once it's spent, it is completely gone. And yet, paradoxically, most of us live as though we have unlimited time. And that for me, really, it was such a shocking feeling to feel like time was honestly running through my fingers and slipping out, and I couldn't get it back. And I remember thinking in the weeks before my mum was leaving of just how much I would give for another five days, or another 5 weeks, or another 5 months. And then ultimately realizing that would only prolong my mum's suffering. So then not wanting her to suffer anymore. So I was constantly living in this, like, I want more time with her. And, oh, actually, I don't want her to be suffering so much. I want her to leave and transition onto the next life. And there was this real like push and pull. And I honestly battled so much with time. I can't explain it well, but this idea of not having any control of it really made me kind of release any kind of anxiety that I had around it afterwards. But during this time, time was the thing that probably caused me the most anxiety. Something that as a doctor I found was that a lot of patients would express to me in their last few days about how much they regretted how much time they wasted on things that didn't matter, whether that was worrying about things that they had said or done, or worrying about our social status or job, or worrying about things that ultimately never mattered in the end. And so this was something that would come up time and time again, was a regret around how time was spent. So I thought it was a really important thing for us to discuss today, because it didn't matter whether they were the top professor at the Oxford University, which is where I was working, or whether they were, the most amazing hedge funder with lots of money. It was just the same feeling of the regret of how they used and spent their time. And I remember this being our last Christmas together, and I remember thinking, is this going to be the last Christmas we have together? And at the time we were still living in hope. And I remember spending that whole Christmas in anxiety that this was this last Christmas that we may or may not have together. And I remember it now, looking back at this day, we were so present to this day because we didn't know whether we were going to have a last Christmas together. And I'm so, in one sense, grateful for my mum having something that we, a disease where she had time to prepare, and we had time to kind of really sit and think with these big, heavy emotions, because I remember this Christmas as being one of the most special Christmases we've ever had, because we were all so present. You know, we really made time for each other during this Christmas period. So I was really grateful for that. So the lesson I really want to take home around time is that yeah, I think for me, during this time, there was a sense of urgency that was really developed. And I really haven't felt that same sense of urgency since. And it's not that I want us all to be living this sense of franticness or like complete like disoriented mess, but this sense of urgency was really powerful. And I'm actually somewhat trying to get back to that sense of urgency now, 4 years on, because I felt like that sense of urgency allowed me to prioritize things so easily. And I really miss being able to just see things so clearly and know that that's how I wanted to spend my time. And that sense of urgency really pushed me to do things that I would never have done if I hadn't been going through this. And it wasn't just the transition from medicine to being a yoga teacher, but it was also just this idea of it prioritized my friendships and relationships. It prioritized my spiritual practices. So there were so many things during that time that sense of urgency really brought me. And I'm trying to get back to that sense of urgency even now. So again, just taking a moment just to jot down a couple of things just to help a little later in your breakout rooms, but just listing three things that you currently spend most of your time on. So just quickly analyzing your day and seeing what are the 3 things that you spend most of your time on. Of those 3 things, and it may not be in those 3 things, is there any activity or relationship which you wish you could dedicate more time to? Whether it's hobby, spending time with family, engaging in a spiritual practice, or making time for yourself. Is there something that's not on the 3 list of 3, or is in the list of 3 that you wanted to spend more time on? Just taking a moment just to jot that down. And just having a think about how you can make time for this in the coming weeks, days. Again, this isn't to solidify right now, but just to jot down a few things, a few ideas or thoughts that might come to your mind. Good, thank you. Okay, so that was the value of time. And the next lesson for us is connection over material success. So this idea of relationships being something that comes up again and again for those who are dying over material success. So when I was a doctor, I rarely heard people say to me, "Oh, I'm so glad that I achieved this, this, and this in my career." And it was often, "Oh, I'm so glad that I had this, this, and this person in my life." And I used to find that really interesting because I often, just in the hospital I was working at, I was often treating professors who were kind of top of their field at the University of Oxford, or who had really done a lot of work on their careers. And it always really surprised me that that wasn't the thing that they mentioned towards the end of their lives. It's not that they disregarded it or discounted it, but it was not something that they were talking about as much as they entered those final days. And one of the teachings I wanted to share with you is one of the most powerful things that I have heard about community building, and it was by this spiritual teacher, Bhakti Swami, and he has 4 principles of community. And this is one of the principles. And I'm just going to read it out because I actually find it so, it's so shaped the way that I feel about relationships. But he said, treat everyone you encounter as if the success or failure of your spiritual life depends on the quality of your interactions with them. The success or failure of your spiritual life depends on the relationships that you have around you. And I just thought that was so profound because, and often we are so quick to sometimes deprioritize relationships as something that will always be there. But this idea that they constantly need work, and this idea that actually that relationship is actually central to a spiritual practice and spiritual life. And often we think that our spiritual practices are so dependent on our own effort and what we're doing, but actually it's not really about us. It's about how we've built the sense of relationships and communities around us. So I really love this teaching, and actually found it to be completely true with my mum. And this was a really tricky time that she had cancer because it was during COVID. And now a lot of people couldn't come to visit her during that time. And in England, we had these things called bubbles. So we were allowed a few people in our little bubbles. And it so happened that the 2 or 3 people that were with my mum throughout her cancer journey were the people that she'd spent her life with. And I'm so grateful to these people. One of them there in front of my mum is Anuradha. And then another gentleman on the left is Shanika Rishi. And both of these souls really, I would say, are the reason that my mum had a good death. It wasn't because of us. It was actually because of the relationships she had built with these 2 individuals, because they helped her die. Now, my mum was initially predicted to have 3 months with us with her cancer. It was a really aggressive ovarian cancer, and she was really unwell with it. However, she opted for some chemo to help prolong her life and give us a bit more time to process the news. And a year kind of passed, and she was really struggling with the symptoms, but she wanted to still keep taking the chemotherapy so that we all got a bit more time with her. And none of us had the courage to ask her the question, but when will you stop? Because all of us were still living in this hope that she would still miraculously be cured and we would have our mum. But it was Shonika, her spiritual teacher, who was the brave one to bring up that conversation with her. And he was the one to ask her, what are you doing? You know, are you delaying the inevitable? And it happened in a space of, it was one conversation. And in that one conversation he had with her, she decided to stop the chemotherapy. And not only did she decide to stop the chemotherapy, she decided to discharge herself from the hospital where we couldn't be because of COVID restrictions. And she decided that she would like to come and die at home. And that was a really, really momentous decision for all of us, because we got to be with her during her final few days. And that was all because of the people that she had spent time building a relationship with throughout her life. And they led her to this point. We couldn't have got her there because we were way too attached to her as a mum to be able to have those kind of conversations. So I feel like, if anything, this was a huge learning lesson for me of connection over everything. And it was this idea of this, we always talk about spiritual communities and Sangha within our spiritual context, but I'd never seen it play out in this way, in this setting of someone dying and seeing the community come together to support someone in their dying journey. So yeah, it's such a weird thing, because I look back at the last week of my mum's life, and it wasn't horrible. It was actually a very joyful time, and we were able to have that because of these people who came into our lives to facilitate a really joyful experience. And we had lots of chanting and singing and dancing even, and it was really, really special. And again, that's not something we could have created. That was the beauty of relationships. So just this idea, again, this is another principle from Bhakti Tirtha Swami, but he said, realize that the people in your present environment might very well be the people whom you live out your life and who are likely going to be with you at the time of death. And I really found that to be so true in this experience, where actually the people that my mum had surrounded herself with throughout her life were the people that ended up dying. And I wasn't planning on sharing this, but I'm just going to share this with you, and I find it mind-blowing. But in the last 5 days that my mum decided to discharge from hospital and come and be at home with us, she shared with me 2 things, and I'll share one of them a bit later. But one of them was that, you know, she felt really sad. She was still struggling with this idea that she was a stay-at-home mum, so she'd poured in her whole life and energy into raising the 3 of us, and we were just about to be adults in the world. And she thought to herself, this is so unfair. I've poured in all of my life work, and I'm not going to be able to see the end result. I'm not going to be able to reap the benefits of all of my hard work. And so she was really struggling with that at the time. And I decided to speak to a spiritual teacher around this point. And I remember him coming back to me with something that was really weird. He said, don't be surprised if your mum decides to leave when you're not in the room, when none of you are in the room. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen, because we've created a 24-hour schedule and there's always one of us present at all times. We're never going to miss her death. That will never happen. And he was right. She picked a moment where all of us had slipped out for one reason or another, and the only person in the room at that time was Anuradha. So all 5 of us were outside of the room. We didn't witness that last final moment, and it was the last moment that Anuradha got to witness with my mum. And it was so interesting, this idea that she was so attached to us that she couldn't actually let go. But once we were away and out of the room, she was able to kind of release and let go and move on. But we were almost preventing her, because we were her greatest attachments as a mum. And it was just a really nice tie-in point, because when my mum took initiation and she decided to commit to this spiritual practice, it was Anuradha who was present at that time for her, at this spiritual birth. And it was the same person who was there when she left. And it was just this moment of just like seeing it in front of my eyes, this principle of community being so important. So I just wanted to share the lesson for this part of connection over material success. My mum really wanted this pink cardigan, this wool cardigan, and she had been desiring it for a very long time, because it was a really nice pink cashmere cardigan. And for her last chemotherapy session, I ended up surprising her and buying that cardigan, and she never got a chance to wear it. And it always, after she died, I often thought to myself, like, she had all these amazing clothes and amazing things and amazing possessions, and none of it. And it was just such a reminder that you cannot take a single thing with you when you go. And I remember her saying, when I gave it to her, she was like, I'm not going to get a chance to wear this. And I remember saying to her, but I will. So one day I will also get to wear this cardigan. So I'm wearing it today for you all. But this idea that we really can't take anything with us. And it was such a big learning lesson when we were getting rid of a lot of her stuff. It was really hard to let go of all these things that she had accumulated, but it was such a reminder that none of that stuff really mattered anyway. And so I'm even though it's nice to be able to have this, it was just a really big reminder for me of the most important things around that time were the connections, and it wasn't about the material things that she had. And something that my mum really expressed, and she said that she wished she had done this sooner, was be a little bit more authentic and vulnerable sooner in her life, so that she could have created deeper connections earlier on and didn't wait until something like this had happened to be vulnerable with people. So that was the learning lesson I took away from this idea of connection. So being able to embrace vulnerability and authenticity earlier. So again, just jotting down our thoughts just for our breakout rooms a little later, jotting down 3 things that you define as a successful life for yourself. Just 3 things, just again, taking a moment just to jot them down. What do they look like for you? Okay. So jotting down 3 things that you would define as a successful life for yourself. Because I know, just whilst you're jotting down, my mum, I remember her saying to me, but I was just a mum. That's what I did in my life. I didn't achieve anything. And then feeling as though, I remember this was the kind of conversation we were having when she first got diagnosed. And by the end, her saying, but I did my job really well and I was a really good mum. So this idea of being able to, yeah, for her, that was seen as success, to see us grow, even if she wasn't going to be able to see the full result of all of her hard work. Okay, so moving on to the second to last lesson from the dying, which was forgiveness and letting go. And this was a huge part of my mum's journey, and one which I know that sounds very obvious, but it was actually one of the hardest things she had to do in order to have a peaceful transition. And just taking from the Bhagavad Gita, but in the Bhagavad Gita, it mentions forgiveness as one of the divine qualities, because it helps us to soften our heart and make room for some higher qualities of compassion and love and joy. But forgiveness can really enable our hearts to kind of grow a little softer. And when we hold on to grudges and when we hold on to things that we feel hurt by, it actually hardens our heart. And so this idea of, from watching my mum have to go through this process, her heart was very hard in the first part of her journey, and she had to really learn how to soften it. So this is my sister here. This was 2 weeks before my mum passed away, and she's helping my mum write letters to everyone. And again, I feel really grateful that my mum got this opportunity to do this. So many people I know don't have this opportunity. So again, I don't take this I don't take this for granted, for sure. This was a really big part of her being able to let go and forgive. And she wrote letters to people she thought she had offended. And she'd also told us, she wrote down a lot of things that she wanted us to burn. So we've never looked at it, and we ended up burning it. So she wanted to just like release it, let it go, and so that she could move on. And so I just thought I'd share this image here, just because for me, this was like a real lesson of how to let go. And my mum was carrying this really heavy weight for, like I said, for the 14 of the 16 months that she had cancer. It was really heavy. It was not a good time. It was a really, really emotional and heavy, dark time. And a lot of things were weighing on her, unfinished conversations, things that hadn't been closed out, and things that she had regretted saying. So a big part of this forgiveness and letting go process was about forgiving herself. And it wasn't just about forgiving others. It was actually being able to sit with herself and be like, I made mistakes and I wasn't so great at that. And I wish I had done it in a different way. But I recognize that I am human and I'm okay. You know, I didn't intend to do certain things, but you know, just her being able to sit with herself and forgive herself was such a profound lesson for me, to not be so hard on myself. And I hope for you also, because I think we're so quick to really, really be hard on ourselves. And so I really found that a really important lesson of forgiveness. It's not just about forgiving others, but forgiving yourself too. And my mum said to me, please don't wait to do this until the end. She was doing it at the end and she wished she had done it sooner. So being able to forgive those when you have health, so that it doesn't weigh on you. And she was saying how this weight, you don't feel it until you're dying, because life is so busy. You can busy yourself away from feeling the weight of holding grudges and holding the anger and resentment. You can totally live completely oblivious to it, but when you're dying, she said that it really is the only thing you can think about, because there's so many things you can't do anymore to busy yourself. So she always said, don't wait until the end. And so the lesson here for me really was learning to let go now, because I really don't want to wait until the end, because quite frankly, we may not get the chance my mum did to have this time to really let go. So I see what my mum had as a huge privilege, and actually I might not get that privilege to be able to have that time to let go when it's really clear. So being able to try and start forgiving, and again, forgiving myself also at this stage in life, rather than waiting until the end. So again, just jotting down our thoughts for our breakout rooms, taking a moment just to reflect on someone you've struggled to forgive, whether it's someone else or yourself. Is there something that you've really struggled to forgive yourself for? So just taking a moment just to write that down and have a think. Okay, good. So just taking that moment just to jot something down. I wish we had much more time, because we could really delve into each of these topics in so many different ways, but I hope that it's giving you a bit of a flavor for each of these different lessons. So the next lesson and the final lesson is defining a good death. Now, this can seem like kind of a contradictory statement, but this was the first experience, and I've experienced death quite a bit being in the hospital. This was probably the closest I saw to a good death. And like I said, it wasn't, the last few days of my mum dying wasn't a heavy experience. It was actually a very light and joyful experience. So it was a really, I felt like a complete psychopath even acknowledging that at one point. I was like, why do I feel joyful right now? But for me, it was a symptom of it being a good death. So this idea that we know we're going to die, so we know for 100% certainty we're going to die. And so being able to have these conversations, I wish I'd had them when they didn't have a direct need at the time, whereas I was having conversations with my mum knowing she was going to die, and that was really painful. But I wish I'd been brave enough to ask some of these questions when it wasn't a direct reality, if that makes sense. So defining a good death. So this is a really wonderful verse from the Gita that explains that when we die, Krishna is saying, as the divine, he's saying, whoever remembers me at the time of death comes to me. And so again, it was one of these early verses I remember learning and thinking, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to think of him when I die. Of course I am. That's super easy. And then as I got older, realizing just how difficult this verse actually is. And so I was thinking about this verse, and from a bhakti point of view, how do we define a good death? So this is a photo. This is when my mum had just decided to self-discharge from the hospice care, and we were driving back home, and I knew at this point this was our last car ride together. So it was my mum, my dad, and my sister and brother either side of me, and I just quickly snapped a photo to remember that this is what it was like to have both of them there. And I remember thinking, God, what's going to happen? I didn't know, I'd seen death countless times. I was working on COVID wards just prior to this happening. So I was familiar of and had been around death, but I just didn't know what that looked like in the context of bhakti and what that really would take shape to be. And my mum, when we came out of the hospital, she got us to put all of our hands into the middle, and her name was Ananda Kishori. So she was like, okay, let's do this. Everyone hands in. And then she was like, Team Ananda. And then we all went, woo! Because she said to us, this is it. I've got to get myself back. And in her view and in her definition of back home, it was to get back to Krishna. So she was focused, and she said, okay, guys, I need all of you in. You need to help me get back now. And I remember for those last 5 days, we would always put our hands in and be like, Team Ananda. And it was just this really silly but joyful way of us remembering what our roles and responsibilities were around my mum having a good death. So again, credit goes to my mum here, because without her acknowledging this, without her accepting this, we wouldn't have been able to accept it ourselves. So she was really being supported by Shonika to have a good death. So yes, defining a good death. So again, can mean lots of things for different people. And over my time, a short time as a doctor, and watching my mum go through this, I found that there were lots of things that came to people at this time. The biggest thing was, is it going to hurt? I'd get patients asking me all the time, is it going to hurt? Am I going to be in pain? And the answer is, it depends. It really depends on how you're dying. And just like birth, when you come into the world, birth is a really very extreme, painful process. When you leave the world, similarly, it can be a very painful process. And luckily, thank you to modern medicine, there are ways to help with pain. And that was something that we really struggled with, was that my mum wanted to be conscious enough, but also have pain relief. And sometimes the pain relief medications can make you unconscious. So it was really trying to get that balance. But physical comfort and emotional peace were real big things that come to people at this time. They want to be emotionally peaceful, and they want to be physically comfortable. So I remember as a junior doctor, I remember it was my first month on the ward, and a patient wanted me to reach out to every one of his members of family to just relay a different message to each of them. And that was part of his emotional peace, coming to terms with everything and closing and resolving relationships. And similarly, again, with my mum, when she was writing all those letters, I felt like that was very much her coming to emotional peace with things that were happening or had happened. The other one was dignity. Now, this was a really, like, it was a real important one for my mum, and she found it really surprising. She was like, I know I'm not this body, but why do I care about my dignity? And there was this real sense of, she at the last few days was starting to lose her bodily functions, and she was starting to feel like, oh my goodness, I don't want you to have to deal with this. Of course, none of us minded, but she was worrying for us, and it was a big part of how she was like wanting to leave, because she was like, I don't want this anymore. So dignity was a huge one. So there was this need for autonomy around this time, just to be able to make decisions. So my mum making that decision, she wanted to die at home, was really important. And the last one was a sense of completion, feeling like everything had been tied up. And my mum, in the last week of her life, was clearing out her entire bedroom so that we didn't have to do it. And she went through everything and all of her like knickknacks, bits and pieces. So she really had this like idea of sense of completion, and she wanted things to be left nicely so that we didn't have to pick up the pieces. And then there was this sense of spiritual readiness. So feeling spiritually ready to move on was something that I saw my mum start to grab onto in the last few days. You know, she was not so present with us because she was so determined and focused to get to that next stage. And our days around the last few days of her life was centered around her little deity that she had. And it was a Gopal little deity, and he's a love heart shaped Gopal. And I'll show you him in a moment. But our whole days did not focus around my mum so much, literally focused around Gopal. And we would bathe him and we would sing to him and we would pass him around and kiss him. My mum got us to kiss him, and just, it was all very, very much centered around that spiritual side of wanting to move on. And of course, every time we started to have, and we did, there were times we had little breakdowns here and there of like, God, what's happening? She would remind us, Team Ananda, remember Team Ananda? So we kept coming back to Team Ananda during this time. And the lesson, this is Gopal, this is this love heart shaped little deity of my mum's. And funnily enough, during that time, we would all be singing Jai Gopal, and just like really, you know, it was a really ecstatic chant we'd all have around those 5 final days. And funnily enough, when I decided to commit to this spiritual practice and path, my spiritual teacher knew about this because he was also singing Jai Gopal with my mum. And so he decided to give me the name Jai Gopali. So that's where I got my name, was from this period of my life where it was a horrible but beautiful period of my life. And so that was the way I got my name, my new name. So something that I really take away from this idea of having a good death is to live as though I'm dying now. And sometimes, and most of the time I forget this, but when, for example, making this presentation again, I was like, oh my God, I want to come back to that sense of living as though I'm dying, so that things become really clear, and I don't waste my time thinking about things that I know are going to ultimately bring me more misery. So living as though I'm dying, and the reason I've said this is because my mum wasn't this big, she wasn't like a spiritual leader or anyone who I would revere in terms of spiritual kind of guidance or guru. She was a mum who did her job very well, I have to say, but she was a mum who I saw repeatedly throughout my life. Some of my earliest memories are of her doing japa, you know, waking up in the morning, she's already downstairs and she's chanting on her beads. And so I would go in as a young child and sit and lie on her lap. And that's one of my earliest memories of my mum. And so I think what I really learned from this part was just this idea of, this can't just happen at the end of your life. Like, it has to be happening now, and it has to be building those habits and spiritual practices now, because when you come to that end point, it was a really bewildering time. And I look back at it and I'm like, how did my mum shift into her spiritual practices during that time? But I think it was because they were so ingrained throughout her life. Whenever she'd had really hard times, she'd always come back to that sense of groundedness through her spiritual practice. So I really felt like that was the lesson for me here, which was to cultivate these spiritual practices now rather than waiting until they're too late. So that consciousness at the time of death, you're preparing for it now rather than waiting and seeing when it's a good time for you to start cultivating that spiritual consciousness. So I just wanted to share finally, before we wrap up, but this idea of preparing for a good death, you know, I look back at my life and I get so many people telling me that I've made a mistake and that I've just thrown my medical career down the drain and what a big waste of money and time. And I have people to this day still telling me that I should go back. And it's so interesting because now I look back at this time and I think you know, I do have doubts. Did I do the right thing? Did I make a rash decision just based on the fact that I was grieving? And maybe I made a really hasty decision. But my mum told me when she discharged herself from hospital in the car here, she said to me, Janaki, which was my name at the time, I only feel comfortable coming home to die because you have the medical knowledge to administer all of these different drugs to me at this time so that I can have a peaceful death. And I hold on to that because whenever someone tells me that I should go back to medicine, I now know that actually I probably went through all of that journey, the 6 years of medical school, 2 years of being a junior doctor, for that part of my life so that I could take care of my mum and could be with her during this time. And so I now see that as not a waste of time at all, but just, wow, that was why I had to go through those years, was actually for this moment now. It doesn't really serve me to be a doctor in this life right now, but it did at that time. And I'm so grateful for that. So for me, it doesn't feel like a waste at all. And I just wanted to share that with you because that was something I only got in hindsight and not during it. Yeah, I just wanted to share that as the final lesson of preparing for a good death, and just again, just jotting down our thoughts. What might a good death mean for you or your loved one? And what would make you feel at peace? What kind of environment would you like to be in? Who would you want to be there? And what unresolved issues would you want to address? And because this actually ties into the breakout question, you can just jot maybe these questions down, and then I'm going to hand this back over to Surabhi Govinda just to introduce the breakout questions. But I'm so grateful that you allowed me to share this. I know most of it was about my mum and my life, and I just hope that there were things that you were able to gain for some of the lessons that I learned that I just haven't really shared before in a big way. So I'm very grateful, and yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jai Gopali. This was so amazing and so profound. When most of us will be very emotionally moved by this, because it's not often we get stories about times when these situations happen. So this has been just marvelous. I know that I'm already feeling very moved, and already my emotional is sitting there. What can I change? How can I look forward? You know, what can I do? So thank you so much. Now we're going into breakout. We're a little behind time, so I'm just going to do a quick 5 minutes. I apologize about that. And what will happen is that I'll start the breakout room. If you've not done this before, you'll get a little message, and you have to say allow on it. And then you won't be sharing video or anything, so you have to let yourself open video and unmute. And then 5 minutes later, I'll send a message saying you've got 60 seconds, and it will exit, and you'll come back to this room, okay? So if you don't want to go in, you just don't accept, don't allow, you can just stay away from that too, okay? So no problems.
What are we discussing in the breakout rooms?
Sorry, yes, Divya. I'm going to post those questions on the chat now. Okay.
On the
Thank
chat
you.
or WhatsApp?
I can do both. I've got
Okay, thank you.
I've got chat right now, so there it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Critic, and my mom, and so that's, you know, I don't know, the day would come when it's my time, and I don't know how I'm gonna be, and clearly the pain, and but my mom used to say jokingly over the years, you know, I want to wake up dead, and it's always it's a funny thing to say, I want to wake up dead, right? Because clearly you're not going to wake up if you're dead, but maybe that was a way to say, you know, I'll wake up on the other side, whatever it was, you know. For me, it left me very empty, really at the bottom of the pit, and for other reasons, but I think it's important to acknowledge that, and that to take the time for respite when you care for someone through the end, you know. And we always, as you mentioned so well, it's hard to grasp the idea that that person is not going to physically be here, right? There is always that inner inescapable hope that we are going to be here forever, right? And that's not going to be the case, whenever that is, right? And somehow my path crossed Raghunath and Wisdom of the Sages, which was not Wisdom of the Sages at the time. And I kind of hooked on to that every day at 5 o'clock in the morning at the time, to kind of start climbing up from the depths of the pit, if you will. And I'm also Jewish and very attached to my Jewish traditions and so forth. So it's a balancing act to be in a space of Krishna, which you acknowledge the visibility of God, where we do not, the physicality of God. So it's like a balancing act, but somehow I find intersection similarities and so forth. So one thing I can say, that going through that, especially with the person who gave you life and going to the pit, I could understand why people decide to check out from this world. And it is hard, and clearly, I don't mind sharing that, because I think it's important to share those moments, those feelings, those vulnerabilities, that, we maybe all go through one way or the other. So, but thank you so much for your story. And I'm sorry if I'm taking so much time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Very nice of you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, we don't have time for more questions, but so what we'll do is do closing comments from Rukmini Prabhu, and I'm going to post, for anybody who's new, I'm going to post some links if you want follow-ups and so forth. And as usual, please put your comments on the session as you like on the text, so we can give feedback. Thank you very much.
We need part 2.
Thank you. Thank you. This was so beautiful, Jai Gopali. We're so grateful. This was absolutely just heartrending. And I can see from the comments in the chats, people were so moved by your authenticity and your openness to share these most sacred moments, last moments with your mom. And, I just want to say in response to the new mom, all glories to your mom, Jai Gopali, for holding you in her lap while she was chanting japa. That gave you a lesson in loving japa. So that's so beautiful. So yeah, thank you so much. And as always, this will be posted, the recording will be posted. And I wanted to invite all of you next month, please mark on your calendars, November 17th on Sunday. Again, we will be hearing from Ineke Zontag, who is from the Netherlands. And she is the US director of the Food for Life Vrindavan School. Maybe some of you know the school in Vrindavan called the Sandipani Muni School. So she is the director, US director of that school, and she travels back and forth between Houston, Texas, and Vrindavan. So she says what they do is they are breaking the cycle of poverty through education. And she'll speak about the FFL school, FFLV, they call it, Food for Life Vrindavan School, and the resources this organization provides to girls and women in rural India. The organization's support is crucial to breaking the cycle of poverty, which will protect them from child marriage, child labor, and trafficking. So please don't forget to join us next Sunday, November 17th. And Jai Gopali, this was such a delight. We are so grateful to you, and so grateful to your mom. So showing us how to leave this world in such beautiful consciousness. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's actually her death anniversary next Sunday. So I just thought the timing of this talk was really serendipitous. So thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for wearing the pinks. Thank you for wearing the pink sweater that she gave you.
Yes. Thank you.
Looks
very nice.
Thank you. So beautiful. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Jai Gopali.
Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Gopali, Hari Bol.
Thank you.
Jai Gopali, I wrote a direct message. I don't know
Okay.
if you got it about what we said in the breakout room.
Oh, please share it. Share it. Or you can share it with me and I can forward to her if she doesn't.
Okay, yes,
see it.
because no, she said she was gonna send me her email. Yeah, because I was so touched, so moved by her story, and I just told her very briefly about my dad and that this was like an answer to my prayers, this talk. And so yeah, she was like, oh, I wish we could connect further. So yes, it was basically
Okay.
that.
I'll send you her
Ah,
contact.
okay, I already have it. Thank you, Jai Gopali.
No,
She
thank
already
you.
wrote it.
Thank you so much.
Answers
You're still
to
there.
prayers.
Sorry. Thank you.
Answers to prayers. Thank you so much.
So
Beautiful,
Amazing.
beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you
So
very much.
grateful.
So grateful to be here. Haribol.
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 Thank you, Rukmani, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Right. Bye, everyone. I'll be closing the session now. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Surabhi Govinda. Haribol.